Hello, Dave Keys here with Solutions by Dave. Today we're going to talk about some semantic web and SEO strategy and a little bit about the background of search engines and an overall view of this dissemination of information idea. My wife is an educator, has been for quite some time. Sometimes starting from a familiar point of reference helps you establish your bearings in less familiar territory. So like I said, my wife is a full-time certified public educator. That's the official language of the state for teacher. And I have participated in a substantial amount of volunteer efforts in education over the years, and I currently serve in an elected capacity in her present school's PTA, and I also serve on the advisory board and will serve on the school board of a newly formed non-commercial charter school headed by the retired principal of our current school. You could say academics is an important aspect of my life and has received a lot of my volunteer time and funding and a lot of my attention and discretionary reading as well. Now, looking at the worldwide web of information, information is categorized by computers and by people, and really by people. Computers store information in a very flat sort of way. And processor computational speed can create the illusion of structure, but structure is really done by people and programmers. Without categorization, a computer's management of information is really just very fast chaos. Now, people generally expect computers by now to be smarter than themselves, and they expect them to provide information that is valuable and or beneficial. The organization of information on computers follows predictable program models and delivers sometimes unpredictable and sometimes predictable outcomes. The search engine results are a product of a complex series of processes that organize and prioritize information on demand. Now, it is a long-held tenet of educational philosophy, to get back to the educational roots of the internet. And it's, of course, a educational, academic, and military platform in its inception. But right now we'll look at the academic philosophy behind a lot of information processing and distribution. So the philosophy in the 30s and previous to that, and in subsequent, although then it was emerging and evolving, but then the philosophy was that the role of journalists and of the media is to deconstruct and simplify the complexities of reality, particularly political reality and policy, to simplify that complexity for consumption by the public. And then it was considered the role of the public to react to the message and information presented by journalists. Now, there were philosophers who disagreed with that approach, and now the name escapes me, but one in particular I recall reading had the idea that there could be a mechanism for the public to receive and understand more complex models of information and be able to deal with the complexity of realities of policymakers, etc. That they would have a mechanism to intake more complex information and feed back not just reaction but opinion and responses to that information back to policymakers, which would then influence policymakers in their next steps, that would essentially fundamentally transform the role of the public from reactionary to participatory in the use and formation of information. Perhaps the expansion of the public awareness of information in our current day 0-hour news cycle has created a niche evermore for the new authority, the professor. It could be media itself that brought in the professor into a niche of authority, especially professors who specialize in any particular field, which they tend to, because generally a professor is going to be a PhD, so specialization would have been a function of the acquisition of that credential. So, other than celebrities, and one other category we'll touch on in a moment, professors and academics are the highest compensated group of professionals in public speaking. Unsurprisingly, when you think about it, that their knowledge is concise, compacted, and very valuable, representing lifetimes of study, observation, and analysis, and practice in disseminating that information to those who have lesser levels of understanding of that information. So, of course, they're very valuable in public speaking and command six-figure, or five-figure, generally five-figure, sometimes six-figure fees. But then we have a new paradigm of public speakers who have very high command of speaking fees. And to see where the real value of information lies today, you only need to look at the speaking fees of these founders of the internet monoliths, Facebook and Google. So here we have Mark and Sergey, Page, and these fees are representative of a yet even higher level or higher value of the way information is presented to people. Now, this effective purveyor of information, the search engine, operates on a very complex model. And the search engine in particular, Google, operates on semantic and neural relationships of the elements of the internet and the web, and they're both dynamic and complex. The role of the search engine is to, with minimal error, simplify and deliver that information that is widely available in response to a public inquiry at any time by any member of the public with access to the system. The algorithms that perform this task are known to be dependent on complex but discernible factors, like links, for example, one part of the algorithm, but there are many others. And my role as an SEO is somewhat like the inverse of a journalist. We assemble information into the public web and coordinate it back into the complexities of a search engine on behalf of our clients. And in essence, we are reverse engineering and expediting the search process. We create and provide signals and characteristics the search engine seeks and uses to validate and prioritize information for its responses to dynamic public inquiries. When we reach the outcome phase of this process we call search engine optimization, or SEO, the results are powerful and rapid. Properly organized and managed information has a very practical and effective outcome. Outcomes that even reach the point of a self-driving car right there in Mountain View that you see driving around the streets in Northern California. Now I'm going to focus on one particular algorithm. That is the PANDA algorithm. It is a patented process that was filed with the U.S. Patent Office in 2012 and published on Google's own website in 2014. PANDA focuses, by a brief read of the abstract, obviously on associations, authority, groups, and trust. Now, to look at the abstract, we see that there are four key components of how the abstract works. First is a plurality of groups of resources. Second, independent incoming links to resources in that group. Thirdly, a count of reference queries. And finally, group-specific modification factors. And one thing I will point out, if nothing else, about this patent and this algorithm, it is entirely focused on groups, never on individual resources. But groups and plurality of groups of resources. So this is a large-scale view of the web. Now, to break that down to a smaller level where you and your website or websites live, you have groups of resources that represent other websites in various groups, and then the group of websites that you tend to be associated with. And here we have you as a member of a group. So you have a status for each group that is subject to specific modification factors in the algorithm, and you have a status associated with that group, like it or not, for good or for bad. Now, Google is looking for this network and this neural plurality of associations to validate websites along with the other signals, and not the thing on the right. So here we have what basically represents at any scale a faulty simple data model of 2006. Now we have your singular resource surrounded by other resources that are singularly or very thinly pointing back to you or to your resource. And this is a very shallow and singular, non-plural, non-groups, and everything about it is just very shallow and very identifiable. Now, this can occur naturally on a small scale, but once scale occurs and growth occurs in the linking, developing this kind of outcome, it's identified quickly by the search engine and ignored, and have continued, even penalized. Now here we have a group of resources in a single layer, and again, this is a singularity which is far less effective. It is effective on a small scale to a certain limit, then it becomes ineffective. And so a lot of people go into creating multiple versions of these, but it's still fairly singular. And what the search engine is really looking for to validate priorities is something more like a neural network that's interconnected, but not just a single layer, but multiple layers, so that the identities become very distinct and separate. And so that these connections become interconnected not only between resources, but between groups and plurality of groups. That's where the strength of the algorithm is then recognized and carried out. That's why websites that are big brands often dominate search results, because many groups of resources give citations and links to those websites. Now, in order to participate in this level, there are hundreds, and here's just a partial list, so there are hundreds of websites where by various means you can have a presence and participate in those groups. Now, particularly on any one website, there are properties that a website owner should create and manage themselves, and any client of ours should also create and manage some of these types of properties, especially YouTube, Google, Google+, the whole Google profile. Now, sometimes we do that on their behalf. It's best if you are creating enough content that you need these channels in order to launch the syndication of your own content. So that Pinterest.com, About.me, which is a very effective tool to provide links and identity to a website, and Twitter.com. There are some others too that some people like to use, and certainly are encouraged to manage what you're comfortable managing. Now, beyond that, we then go into issues with mobile compatibility, which can have some influence. Silos on your website, metas, rich content, and media production. Now, particularly, what's the organization of your website? Is it relevant to your market and to those who will buy from you, which is even more important than those who will find you, is those who will both find you and buy from you or connect with you in order to become a customer or client of yours. The silos should make sense around those, not around your business model necessarily, but around the people who will become your customers. Those are the people who should be easily ushered into your web presence in a way that's comfortable for them in their mindset, and that's how a silo should be presented to the search engine and to your customers. Now, when it comes to organic ranking, a lot of things can be deployed in the model I was talking about earlier in a plurality of groups of resources. Some of these include, of course, just standard organic ranking signals, and that is effective, just standard links to a point is effective. But then you need greater propagation, and a lot of that can be done by video, which is why YouTube is such a powerful asset in your array of web presence. That you have a presence on especially YouTube and perhaps other video channels. And then there are pipes, which is a syndication of content. We'll take a look at that briefly. So here is Yahoo Pipes, and Yahoo Pipes allows you to syndicate content, both your own and other channels, into a single feed. So this is kind of a step one. And also, we have IFTTT and RSS stacking. So let's look at IFTTT. That is semi-automation to fully automation of things that occur on one website, and then this tool can then take actions and produce content on another website in response to what happens on the first one. These can be chained, daisy-chained, and created in very complex structures in order to accomplish syndication of content across multiple identities. Now, we look at RSS stacking, and a lot of this is about stacking of authority, and if we look at domain authority from Moz, it's an quite accurate assessment of how much clout a website is going to have and how much favor it will have in the search engine. And higher domain authority does generally receive higher favor across a broader spectrum of search results from the Google search engine. Looking at RSS stacking, for example, let's look at feedage.com as an example. So here I have multiple feeds from various resources. These feeds can then in turn they both create links and provide opportunities for the syndication of content on other web resources. Domain authority stacking, because we're kind of moving into that topic now, and some of the resources I pointed out before back here are resources that can be used in domain authority stacking, and again, this is a method of recreating or creating the plurality of resources that the search engine is looking for. So you're able to, with unique and quality content, create syndications that move toward that ideal and outperform your competitors. So a couple of examples of, and if you're interested in domain authority stacking, I am not going too far into it because there are non-disclosure agreements with the folks who created it, but you can look up ThemeZoom and just look up domain authority stacking on the internet, and you can find these resources to give you an overview as is permitted by the folks that created this concept. So that's ThemeZoom. But here are some examples of resources that can be used in domain authority stacking and creating the signals from trusted resources back to your website as part of a group of resources that increase your own domain authority, increase your ability to rank across a broader spectrum of topics and keywords. So here is, for example, Storify.com, and Storify.com has between 1 and 100, it has a domain authority rating of 89, for example. Here is About.me. That domain authority, I believe, is it's slightly higher, 91. And About.me has specific characteristics to it that you treat a little bit differently because its links are do follow. Also, Google Plus, of course, any of the Google properties have a perfect domain authority of 100. And then we have Rebel Mouse right here. Another high domain authority, 78, slightly lower. Very easy to use, very good at syndicating content. And then websites like Pinterest, which again I said, management of any of these channels that really fit your business and work well for you, you should be engaged in the creation of content, because basically the driving engine of this is quality content. And you can try to cheat the system and reach some levels of success by cheating the system, but you really should be creating content, because that is the core of what Google uses as fuel. A lot of people think it's links, and links are simply indicators of where the fuel is. The fuel is content. So creating that content is what the search engine uses to categorize. It needs content to categorize and prioritize to deliver to the public. So that content in turn should be driven by you and your business to fulfill the needs of the search engine in order for it to even provide your results as something that is worthwhile to the public in response to an inquiry. So that completes this presentation. Thank you for watching. Visit anytime solutionsbydave.com.